Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men and Alpha Flight #1 in a 2-issue limited series. There's a wraparound cover by Paul Smith, inked by Bob Wiacek. So this artistic team reuniting and coming back to the X-Men, but also Alpha Flight. And who is here on the back cover except for Loki? So what does Loki have to do with things? Let's open this one up and take a look at the splash page. You can see too here that on the inside cover there's an advertisement for Heroes for Hope starring the X-Men. Lovely Arthur Adams cover there. And you can see, as I was studying it, I could see one or two features of this era Adams that influenced Rob Liefeld. In particular, if you look at down here at the bottom of the page, this curved mound, that was a little device that Liefeld took from Arthur Adams, and also the bold fist there on Wolverine. That's very much a Liefeld fist from later on in his career. But our focus is on the interior story. What we have is 48 pages constituting part 1 of this 2-issue miniseries. The paper stock is a higher quality than newsprint, but we're in the era of the flexographic printing process, so you get a lot of dots in the colors that are not pure cyan or magenta or yellow. The title of the story is The Gift, and as we get into the story we'll discover who is the gift giver. Quite surprising, the answer to that one. But what a beautiful opening splash page. Really like the use of a screen tone here for the clouds. It's very nicely done. The creative team, Chris Claremont writer, Paul Smith and Bob Wiacek artists, Tom Orzechowski letterer, and Glynis Oliver colorist. And there is 2 editors on this, so Denny O'Neil and Ann Nocenti. So Denny O'Neil contributing to the story based on a premise by Jim Shooter, Ann Nocenti and Denny O'Neil. So clearly those editorial types at Marvel wanted to put Alpha Flight and X-Men together and came up with an idea for such a story, and Chris Claremont wrote it up. So who's speaking here? We're looking at a cargo plane. Anchorage Center, this is North Star 340, come in please, over. I say again, Anchorage North Star 340, do you read me? The story takes place before the events depicted in Alpha Flight number 25. Who is flying that plane? Turn the page and it will turn out to be, even though it's strange that we don't see her here, but Madeline Pryor. The aircraft is a Lockheed L-100 Hercules, workhorse of the North Star Airways fleet, able to carry virtually any cargo anywhere in any weather. Tonight it's humping a mixed Canadian-American environmental survey team across Alaska to the remote wilderness above the Arctic Circle. So we have a little conversation between a couple of the members of the survey team. We have Paul and Jean here, and they're worried. Well, Paul is worried about the turbulence, and it's Scott Summers comes back here to have a little chat with them, saying to them, mountains and bumpy air go together, I'm afraid. And Paul responds, just so it isn't mountains and plains. For you, sir, we'll be extra careful. So what happens here is we learn that Paul is a geologist, but he also carries a sketchbook around with him because he says he's sort of a hybrid, you see, as much architect as engineer. And in his sketchbook, he is drawing abstract forms, fantasies, whatever comes to mind. Crazy as it sounds, I've actually turned some of these Looney Tune doodles into real buildings, he says. And Scott says they're beautiful and he'd like to take a look at them in the future. So that's agreed. Scott continues back down the fuselage of the plane, checking in on various members of the survey team. So we've got the botanist here, we've got this woman Carla here, and she's taking a snooze in the back of the plane, and she's the survey team's cook. And then we've got these 2 guys here, Jacques and Wilson, Dr. Wilson, and it turns out that Dr. Wilson is an anti-mutant bigot, where he's saying here to Jacques, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. My speciality is the relationship between predator species, and man's the biggest predator of them all. Now, in nature, only the fittest survive, and the strong always dominate. These muties may look like us, gentlemen, but they all have incredible, potentially deadly powers. What's to prevent them taking over? We're the competition, Jacques. There are only real rivals. To survive, they've got to enslave us or wipe us out, unless we do it to them first. And Scott is downcast by overhearing this conversation. I'm a mutant, Wilson, he thinks to himself. And if I took off these special ruby quartz glasses, my eyes would cut loose with optic blasts that could smash you to a pulp. Only, as Cyclops as an X-Man, I use them to defend humanity, to protect people like you. Moments like this, though, I wonder why I bothered. So you can see his shoulders a little slumped there. But in the back of the plane, he finds the Loadmaster. And the Loadmaster was listening in on Wilson's conversation. And he's not happy about it. He says, been listening to those two lumps a while. Wilson reminds me of when I was growing up in Chicago and the folks' stories about their lives in Mississippi. Always seems a lot easier to stir up that kind of fear and hatred than make it go away. Funny thing is, no matter how old or tough you get, how much you hear, how often you tell yourself it don't matter, you still take things personal. The words still hurt. So Scott concurs, saying, sometimes I wish I could make all that just vanish, all the fear and hatred. And the guy says he knows the feeling. And then here we go. So this is a little clue to the origin of the story that we're going to read across the miniseries. So the man says, you ever read an Ursula K. Le Guin novel? It's a 1971 novel. I looked it up, The Lathe of Heaven. It's a sci-fi novel. And this is indeed the summary. It's about a fella whose dreams alter reality. Other guy uses him and the dreams to try to abolish all the world's ills. Trouble is, the more good he does, the worse everything gets. Wishing's fine, son, but some things, the really important ones, I figure, have to be earned. Otherwise, they mean nothing. Now, remember that for later in this particular issue. And then the guy goes on about how he's a big reader because he's got a lot of time after he's loaded on the crates and other cargo onto the plane. So he likes to read literary fiction, works like this, writers like Joyce. So he's reading Ulysses there. He says, I could read forever. I've even been scribbling some stuff of my own. Scott asks to see that too. So then Scott goes up to the cockpit, and in there we've got Madeline, and he asks her straight off, any trouble? And she says, you might say that. And again, really nice panel here of the plane flying along, the lightning flashing around it, the screen tone for the clouds. It's really nice stuff. She says, you might say that. I've never seen atmospherics like this. Turn the page, and somebody has seen such atmospherics, and it's Scott. I have, he says. Long before we met, the X-Men tangled with the Canadian super team Alpha Flight. Their magician shaman manipulated the polar weather to force our plane to Calgary, where they were waiting. This is the same kind of weird effect. So Madeline asked the question, why would they bother with a flight of government eggheads? I like the kind of body language here, or the acting, where Scott is rubbing her hair there. And then Scott continues, they're freelance now. Who knows what's happened to them since their leader Guardian's death? That was in Alpha Flight number 12. Maybe somebody wants this survey stopped. Then the crewman announces that there's a fire in engine number 3. Madeline says that tears it. Broadcast a mayday. Scott, let's find a place to put this beast down. But then there's a big flash, that light, and Scott calls out Madeline. Great spotting of blacks there in the cockpit. And then the scene shifts. And this is a Paul Smith characteristic of his layout. So he's getting a plot from Claremont, and Claremont trusts him to lay out the story visually. But Paul Smith likes to change scene on a page, like in the middle of the page or at the bottom of the page, rather than having a scene change on a new page. That's distinctive of him, and I comment on that in relation to his Uncanny X-Men run. So the scene switches to Salem Center, an hour's drive north of Manhattan, and we zoom in on what is it like? It's like a milkshake shop, and in there we've got Douglas Ramsey clowning around trying to impress some ladies at one of these booths. And who's he there with except for Ileana Rasputin? And he's there like pretending to be a vampire, biting her on the arm, but she turns around too quickly and knocks him onto the ground. So the girl's there just laughing at him, and he's still clowning that it's agony, oh agony, when the milkshake shop bully grabs him by the jacket and pulls him up off the ground and says to him in a borderless panel, "You're lucky you aren't some scummy mutie, Doug boy, or it'd be my duty as a real human being to rip you to pieces." So there again we have more proof of bigotry and hatred towards mutants. And of course Doug, even though he doesn't look like a mutant, he's got a very kind of passive mutant ability. His ability to understand all languages and translate. He's like a universal translator. So Ileana intervenes. Now this is after her time in Belasco's dimension, and so she is in effect an unfinished demon sorceress, and she has got some look about her that sets the bully to thinking twice about physically intimidating Douglas. So he's there begging, "I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry," and the two of them run out the door down a back alley, and then magic Ileana uses her sorceress's powers to manifest a stepping disc and teleport herself and Doug a few miles outside town to Professor Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. It's a really nice sequence, nicely done. And once again, you see just what I was talking about, a scene change on the bottom of the page, on the same page. And they manifest in the control booth of the Danger Room, just as Kitty is about to run a training sequence. And I like the little kind of business with Lockheed there, sitting on the back of her chair and looking at her sandwich there, like he's interested in eating it. So she rebukes him, "Lockheed, that's my snack. Lay off, dragon." And then you can see the milk carton that she's got here. On the back of it, if you look at this in high definition, "Missing child, Paul Smith." A little mini portrait, self-portrait of the artist there on the side of the milk carton. And then we get our shot of the Danger Room and the X-Men of the time period. Storm is in Africa, so this is around issue 198 of Uncanny X-Men. And so our team consists of Colossus, Nightcrawler, Rogue, Rachel Summers, but before she's transformed into Phoenix in 199, and Wolverine. So something goes badly awry. Rachel starts, her head drops, side flash, and then she screams. And then the control booth is taken over by Rachel's telekinetic talent. It's trashing the console, and then a program is set off that wasn't programmed by Kitty, and it's the Sentinels. The room can create any environment, any situation, any threat imaginable, says the third person narration. Some are sophisticated illusion, but others are real. And this is one of those. The scene pulled from Rachel's memories is New York in the early 21st century, an alternate timeline where mutants are hunted down and slain on sight, including her family, including her friends, a fate she hopes will never come to pass, yet fears cannot be changed. So Colossus instantly transforms into his organic steel form. And then what's really interesting is the X-Men get a look at Rachel in her Hound uniform, and they start speculating. Rogue says, "This is Ray's future, the alternate timeline where all mutants were outlaws." Wolverine, "Look at that girl. Is that Rachel? Did she help the feds slaughter her own kind? Wolverine responds characteristically, saying, "Ain't our concern right now, darling." And he calls out to Colossus for a fastball special. So Colossus hurls him up at that Sentinel, and Wolverine starts ripping away. So it's a really nice sequence. And because they're so trained to work together as a team, Nightcrawler's there to catch Wolverine and safely deposit him on the ground, teleported out of harm's way, while Colossus uses his own body as cover for Rachel while he's blasted from behind by the Sentinel. Rogue, with her super strength, seeks to take on one of the Sentinels, but she's punched while aloft. Big tin bruisers are popping out of the woodwork, she thinks to herself. So Colossus catches her, and when she makes skin-to-skin contact with him, she begins a transformation, absorbing his powers. Now, we're told in the narrative captions, we don't see it in the visuals, Colossus drops to the floor, unconscious, human, and helpless. But we don't get that in Paul Smith's drawings, so Claremont thinking he needs to clarify that for readers. And during this period, the professor is elsewhere in the mansion. He is busy creating academic lesson plans when he gets a psi flash from Kitty. "I'm phasing through the command console, sir," she says, "and thereby disrupting its circuitry, but it isn't having any effect. The computers, the systems, are completely under Rachel's control." So the professor astrally goes to Rachel and uses his telepathic talent to calm her mind, and then she begins to come to herself. Turn the page. But her telepathy is still operating and shows what we saw at the beginning of the comic, the plane flying in the storm in Canada. Wolverine recognizes the model of the plane, a Herky bird belonging to the outfit owned by Sykes' grandparents. And then we get a replay of the dialogue of Scott in the cockpit with Madeline, and we see that the plane was struck by lightning. That's why the third engine went on fire, and then the plane crashing to Earth. And Scott emerging from the wreckage, and Rachel sees him emerging from the wreckage, and then she cries out, "Daddy," because Scott Summers is her father, or supposed to be, even though I have a pet theory that it's actually Wolverine who is Rachel's father. And then the scene switches. Okay, on a new page. Calgary, Alberta, Canada, the medical center of the Sarcee Reservation, in which Dr. Michael Two Young Men is busy examining a fellow member of Alpha Flight. So we begin with the X-Men, and now we pick up with Alpha Flight. And what's going on here is that Sasquatch is having some trouble. He's become more and more prone to terrible, violent berserker rages. A little bit like the reverse of what's going on with Wolverine, where Wolverine is getting more and more control over his berserker side. And Shaman leaves his consulting room, and Aurora is there, and she's taken a fancy to Sasquatch, and she tells him, "Tu es inquiet, disturbed and in pain. I can make that go away. I can make you happy for a time if you'll let me." So typical Claremont, where we get the representation of a sexually assertive woman in the case of Aurora. And as that's all going on, the shaman is walking away thinking about things physically. Sasquatch, Walter Lankowski, is in perfect health. There's no organic etiology for his condition. He's a biophysicist. He must have determined that for himself before he came to me, which leaves two alternatives. His problem is psychological in nature, or it is magical. And that's the word that's bolded, and that kind of sets up a mystery for what is coming in the rest of the comic. So in his other office, we have Heather McDonald waiting for him in this era. She's the leader of Alpha Flight after her husband's death. And something happens behind them. Into the office comes Snowbird, and she's in trouble. That's really well drawn by Paul Smith there. How she's slumping against the jamb of the door. And Shaman asks her what has happened. And all she has the strength to say is Ungava Bay, the death of us all. And then suddenly she's grabbed by a bird's claws, the talons of a bird. Or rather, she isn't, but Shaman is. And whose hand is this? It's Rachel's. I want him returned to me unharmed, she says, because witch doctor, if he's dead. And Shaman reaches for his magic pouch, his medicine pouch, but Rachel's wise to him. She calls out and says, assassin, that bag contains your mystic arsenal. I'm not about to let you near it. And so she casts it away, and unfortunately for Heather, it gobbles up her arm, so to speak. That's the way I'll put it. So there's big trouble happening, and Aurora and Sasquatch transform into their superhero forms, let's call it that. And here the X-Men's Blackbird is arriving, and Rogue flies out immediately. Aurora arrives, and Rachel's ready for her. And as for you, miss, you can't sneak up on a telepath or beat someone who reacts with the speed of thought. And Rachel, with her telepathy, senses dichotomous opposing personalities within Aurora. Let's see what happens when I switch dominance from the aggressive to the other. Yeah, so Aurora has two personas, and her weaker persona now comes to the fore and is horrified at the situation she finds herself in. So she exclaims here, once more I find myself far from home, dressed as that shameless trollop. And Heather's still in trouble there with the medicine pouch, and Shaman demanding that Rachel stop her attack. So outside, Sasquatch and Puck meet each other in a corridor, and Puck says whoever's responsible will clean their clocks, eh? Just at this point, Rogue arrives, hearing the screams. Better make my move, but something comes from behind, comes speeding behind her, and it's North Star. So it's Aurora's twin brother, Jean-Paul Beaubier, speed demon of the North. I guess he figured on taking me out right from the bat, she thinks. Silly boy, and she kisses him. So that knocks him out, and she thinks to herself, but along with his powers, I've also absorbed his memories, every particle of his being. I know his joys, his pain, his dreams and terrors, all his secrets. So North Star, a very secretive guy, has secrets. Rogue knows them. That's going to set up things for later in this issue and series. Sasquatch arrives finally, breaking through the wall, and Rachel's not cowed in any way. She says, you think you're hot stuff? Come on then, take your best shot. And just at this point, the professor arrives, teleported in by Nightcrawler. And in this era, the professor is out of his wheelchair and able to walk around because he is in a cloned body after the Brood Saga, the first Brood Saga. And he's angry. Rachel, he exclaims psionically, come with me onto the astral plane. So really acting in headmasterly form here, giving Rachel the opportunity to neither resist nor argue. Xavier literally yanks her psychic self out of her body. So now we have some kind of like still some things to sort out here, including Heather's arm lost in the pouch. Nightcrawler is known to Alpha Flight, of course. The last time that Alpha Flight and the X-Men met, I think, and Nightcrawler met Alpha Flight, was Uncanny X-Men 140. So it's been a while. But then we check in on the astral plane, and Xavier, the professor, is yelling out Rachel. How dare you act in such a fashion, he exclaims. You're an X-Man. You have no right to tamper with another's mind, regardless of the provocation. So he's reading her the riot act. Meanwhile, Nightcrawler is helping out, grabbing the end of that medicine bag, saying it isn't budging. But then he does get it off. She's free and her hand's unharmed. But how did it happen? The pouch's powers were momentarily neutralized, and that's because Shaman's daughter, Talisman, called by. She heard her father's mystic SOS and came as quickly as she could. So Shaman now uses his pouch to work on Snowbird, and he says this should restore her strength and aid her body's struggle against the corruption consuming her. What could it be, though? I've never seen it. It's like, he says, as physician or medicine man. And that's a hint that, it could be something magical in origin. So the professor re-enters his physical body, and he says to Rachel, let us try to undo the harm you've done. So the harm is still ongoing here, but what the professor does is he uses his telepathic power to restore Ms. Bobier to her former self. So now she's back to her Aurora personality, and she's wondering, who is that mad girl? Why did she attack? That's Rachel. She mentioned her father, and Professor X says Rachel picked up a psychic cry from Cyclops, implying that you had ambushed him. And Shaman denies it. That's nonsense, he says. And meanwhile, Snowbird has got enough strength back to say Cyclops' aircraft was struck down the same moment I was. There is a great wrongness, a great and terrible evil emanating from Ungava Bay. So that's twice now she's mentioned that location. And Nightcrawler chimes in and says, we've been charting a phenomenally powerful mutant presence, which also appeared in that vicinity last night. 3 simultaneous incidents, a continent removed. Coincidence, he asks? And just at this point, the rest of the X-Men catch up, and along with Puck and Rogue carrying Northstar. So they determine to investigate, and the Blackbird, it appears, is not big enough to take everyone, the 2 teams together. So Puck says, leave that to Puck. Eugene, Milton, Judd will take care of everything. So let's turn the page and see how he does that. But we don't get that because the scene switches unexpectedly, and it's nice that it was kept for a page turn as well, to elsewhere, in a place that is as much apart from the worlds of gods and mortals as it is a part of them. If gods can be said to have gods themselves, this is where they live. And it is here Loki of Asgard, god of mischief, adopted son of All-Father Odin, has come seeking a prize beyond price. So this is really nicely done as well. The black and white images here of these gods above the gods. And they have come to some kind of arrangement with Loki. They sit in shadow, above in shadow. They welcome Loki. And Loki says, my task is complete, noble lords and ladies, my part of our bargain fulfilled. The time hath come for thee to honour thine. And they say, not so, not yet. We charge thee not simply to do a good deed for the people of Midgard, that's Earth, but in the process to prove thyself worthy of our favour. The one is easy, the other far less so, as thou art discovering. The boon asked of us by thee is great and supremely precious. We do not grant it lightly. We don't know what that boon is. And Loki responds, I'm the son of Odin. It is not in my nature to ask for anything. Be that not the point of this entire exercise, responds the god, to prove that nature can be changed? As we recall, thy half-brother Thor, god of thunder, had to learn the true humility that must needs temper such awesome power as we immortals possess. And Loki says, the god says to Loki, mayhap this is thy turn. Loki responds, some might say that a bona fide savior of the universe who stood by Odin's right hand when the All-Father faced the demon Surtur, reference to Thor 353, might have little to be humble about. So the god agrees. True, or very great deal, though. Be patient, Loki, says one of the female goddesses. Thou shalt hear our judgment anon. So he goes away thinking, and we get more explanation of what this good deed was. Once, not so long ago, I'd have chafed at such treatment. I would have raged, threatened, schemed, fought, and thereby lost all. But I am not the god I was. I will remain master of myself and my emotions, behave as nobly as my doltish brother, and thereby accomplish what is beyond even his might. Loki the trickster, the deceiver, the so-called god of evil, shall bring everlasting peace to the earth. Now remember the reference to the Ursula K. Le Guin novel, The Lathe of Heaven. That's where we're going with this story now. Very, very interesting. And then we're back with Alpha Flight and X-Men. So this is the airplane, the aircraft that Puck got for everyone. And Nightcrawler is his co-pilot. There they are flying away in the cockpit. And Heather says to Puck, I won't ask where or how you got this. And he just responds, good. So Nightcrawler says, we're approaching Upper Seal Lake. Figure roughly 300 kilometers to Ungava Bay. With luck, another hour. So they're en route to the location of the mystery and the wrongness that Snowbird sensed. And Heather goes back to tell the others. And so Shaman is still looking after Snowbird there. And it's dire for her prognosis. He says both medicines and magics are having less and less effect. Narya may see tomorrow's sunrise, but unless the gods have mercy on their daughter, it will be her last. So time is ticking for Snowbird. And Heather thinks, I hate it. Unable to help, unable to do anything but watch. I'm a normal human being, an ordinary woman. What right do I have to even be here, much less lead Alpha Flight? And that thought of hers about being an ordinary woman with no powers will feed into the second half of this issue. So she apologizes for the cramped quarters back there, checks in on Sasquatch and Aurora, and Aurora is wishing ill on Rachel, a dagger she wants to thrust through that red-headed mind witch's heart. And Rachel's picking up on the hostility. Aurora isn't bothered to hide her thoughts. She says to Kitty, she's so close, her emotions are so strong and violent, I can't screen them out. Serves me right, I guess. And Kitty simply says, no argument there. But she adds, because Rachel is her friend, but Aurora's overreacting. Somehow you two have got to make peace between yourselves. Our lives may depend on it, because X-Men and Alpha Flight are going to have to work together as a team. I like the fact that Lockheed is hostile towards Aurora as well. Lockheed, relax, this is none of your business. So keep your nose out of it. And Rachel apologizes to Heather, and she's thinking of her own regrets about actions of hers in the past, about distracting her husband for that crucial split second in New York when he was killed. And then she sits down beside an old friend, Wolverine. We certainly are a band of happy warriors, she says. We don't need a villain to fight Logan. We'll gladly tear ourselves to pieces. And he responds, he's having an old drink there. After what's happened, you're surprised? There's never been any love lost between these two outfits. Want a coffee, Heather, or something stronger? He invites her to take a swig out of his hip flask. You look like you could use it. And I like the acting now that Paul Smith comes up with. She takes her glasses off. No thank you, Logan, she says. Let's turn over the page. And then she's just kind of rubbing her eyes, holding the glasses. At one point, she puts the end of the arm of one of the glasses, of her glasses, in her mouth, and she's gesturing with them. That is great body language and acting there in Paul Smith's pencils. Definitely deserves praise for that. Keeping things interesting for what is otherwise just talking heads on this particular page. So she says to Logan, you know, Mac always intended you to lead Alpha. And Logan responds, I got other responsibilities, Heather. Duty, obligations, jiri. That's what they call it in Japan to both the X-Men. And another that's as important to me as Mac was to you. I give Charlie a hard time to keep him honest, but the X-Men are my home, my family. I won't walk out on them. And Heather responds, we were family once, because it was she and her husband who found Logan wandering sick and naked in the wilds of northern Canada, and saved him and brought him in and helped him, nursed him, and helped him back to his right mind and senses. And Logan responds, you still are family, but the rest of Alphans are only friends. It's a big difference. And Heather says, Puck speaks the same way about Alpha. He has a lot more faith in me than I do. And this is funny in the dialogue from Claremont. The midget's got good instincts, darling, says Logan. Trust them. And Heather speaks up for Puck. Watch them out, bub. You ain't that flaming tall. It's North Star I worry most about, she says. Logan, there's so much anguish and rage inside him, and he won't share it with anyone. He's so afraid of being vulnerable and hurt. So Wolverine says, I'm surprised he agreed to join this mission. You know he quit she says to him, I'm surprised he agreed to join this mission. You know he quit the team. He's gone ahead as scout. I hope he'll be all right. And Wolverine says, not to worry, Rogue tagged along. And Heather exclaims, she did what? Jean-Paul teamed with a woman, especially her. Logan, they'll kill each other. Maybe, maybe not, he says. So Rogue absorbed North Star's mind, memories, as well as his powers. And so she knows what exactly there is driving the anguish and rage inside him, his secrets. And so we're going to get a little heart-to-heart between them. But we're midway through this 48-page comic, and I'm going to call this the end of part 1 review and commentary on X-Men Alpha Flight 2-issue miniseries. So do check back next week for part 2 of my review of issue number 1 of the series. Let me know your thoughts on this so far in the comment section to the video. And if you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video on YouTube. It really helps the channel, as does sharing the video. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more content like this.